ground venison, bacon, onions, all wrapped up in pretzel dough, baked in the oven until they've become the most beautiful pretzel, venison, bacon cheeseburger bombs. It's hard to even really settle on a name of what to call these things. I've seen other people make all manner of burger bombs, and I wanted to try coming up with my own variation on it, using venison. I started to think about what tastes great in a venison burger, and then I kind of thought, wow, these flavors would go really well with pretzel. So I kind of turned this whole thing into a pretzel version of what might be considered a ordinary burger bomb. Anyway, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, hopefully you saw the thumbnail. We're taking burger meat and cheese and onions and some other things, wrapping them all up in some dough, turning that dough into pretzel dough, and then baking the whole thing until it comes out in this perfect little package of deliciousness. We're going to go through every step of the way to make these things, and we'll also whip up a delicious but quick little burger sauce, and the whole thing's going to be amazing. So let's get right into it and take a look at the meat we're going to be using. This here is a small eye of round from the hind quarter of a deer. I picked this cut because I don't need a huge roast for this recipe, and this little guy will work perfectly. When I originally packaged it up for freezing, I didn't thoroughly trim it, so I'll do that now. For this cut, that pretty much means this thick ribbon of fat along the side. And since it'll all be going through the grinder, I'll just cut it up into some smaller chunks. And that's it. Now, for any good burger grind, I need to incorporate some good fat into this ultra lean deer meat. And for this dish today, I'll be using bacon. More specifically, I'll be using some chopped up bacon hunks that I trimmed off the edges of the last full slab that I smoked. Alternatively, you could use some uncured pork belly, pork shoulder, or really any other fatty pieces of pork. If you don't have any pork, use some fatty beef. Anyway, I'll get this venison and bacon on a little tray and stick it all in the freezer for just a little while to get nice and firm before running it through the grinder. In the meantime, let's get started on the dough for these burger bombs. I'll be starting off with what is basically a simple pizza dough. So into my stand mixer goes 2.5 grams of yeast and 162 grams of water that's been heated to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Then in goes 250 grams of flour and 5 grams of kosher salt. With the dough hook in place, I'll get that to mixing on about medium speed for 10 minutes. Now I'll turn out this dough onto a floured surface and form the whole thing into a nice ball. And by the way, I'm making a half-sized batch of dough today, and this will be enough for 4 burger bombs. If you need more, just double the recipe. Next, I'll lightly grease a bowl and drop in that ball of dough. Cover it with some plastic wrap and leave it alone to rise for the next hour and a half. And while we're waiting for everything else, let's make a quick and delicious dipping sauce. I think a honey Dijonnaise is perfect for these or any other kind of burger bombs. We'll start with 1/4 cup of mayo, followed by 2 to 3 tablespoons of good Dijon mustard, then about a tablespoon of honey, and some paprika. Let's call it 1.5 teaspoons. Mix everything together very thoroughly, and that's it. Our honey Dijonnaise sauce is ready. One last little bit of prep work for our burger bombs. I need to peel and chop up 1/2 of a yellow onion. Now our meat is nice and firm from the freezer, and it's time to grind. I'll be using the medium-sized grind plate for this and doing just a single grind. Now I've got some very nice looking ground venison and ground bacon, and we're finally ready to start cooking. So I'll get my deep cast iron skillet nice and hot over medium-high heat, and in goes all the ground meat. Followed by those chopped onions. I'll let everything cook away until the meat is nicely browned and the onions are softened. By the way, since I've got all that salty bacon in there, I don't need to add any salt. But if you're using uncured pork or beef, go ahead and add in a big pinch of salt. And when I'm just about there, I'll throw in a teaspoon or so of minced garlic and 1 teaspoon of some Worcestershire sauce. Finally, I'll stir in about 1/3 cup of shredded white cheddar cheese. Of course, this is going to make the meat mixture cheesy and delicious, but it's also going to melt in and bind everything together, providing a bit of glue to this whole thing to keep everything from just being a crumbly mess of loose meat. Now the heat's off, and I'll set this aside for a few minutes until I'm ready for it, because now it's time to get back to our dough. The dough has about doubled in size, so I'll turn it back out onto a floured surface. I'll give it just a couple quick kneads to degas it, and then I'm segmenting it out into 4 even pieces, which worked out to be 110 grams each. Next, I'll just start rolling them out. I'm aiming for something along the lines of a disc of dough that's about 5 to 6 inches in diameter. And because this springy pizza dough has a tendency to want to shrink back up after rolling it out, I'll give them a preliminary flattening and then let them rest for another 10 minutes. That'll give the gluten a chance to relax a little, and I can then proceed to stretch them out the rest of the way. Basically like little mini pizzas. Okay, our discs of dough are looking pretty good, so let's start assembling our burger bombs. I've already got the cheddar cheese and the meat mixture, but some nice melty American cheese fits very nicely into this ensemble. So I'll lay down a couple of squares on each of my dough pieces. And then I'm just spooning down some of that cheesy meat and onion filling. I don't want to skimp on the filling, but I gotta take care not to overstuff them either. I definitely don't want to blow out during cooking. Now to close these things up. Starting from 2 opposite sides, I'll begin closing up my dough. Just go corner to corner, pulling everything to the center. There's basically 8 points that all need to get pulled inward and pinched together to close and seal this whole thing. I'll take extra care to gently pinch all the seams together and then give the whole ball a roll on the table. We need this ball of goodness to be completely sealed up to be sure that nothing leaks out and nothing leaks in during the next steps. And I promised pretzel dough, which is exactly what we're doing next. I've got a large pot with 20 quarts of water coming up to a boil. I didn't need this much water, but I've found the whole operation to be a little easier and less messy when doing it with this larger pot. Once the water is boiling, I'll start gradually adding some baking soda. And I mean gradually, like painfully gradual. Because as you can see, each time I add some baking soda, the pot rapidly boils and foams up. If you go even a little too quickly, you'll get a horrible spillover and create a huge mess. Go back and watch my old pretzel bread bowl video if you want to see how I know this. Anyway, I'll sprinkle a little baking soda at a time until I've added about 1 cup. Now I'll start carefully lowering in my burger bombs. I'll just do one at a time because each one takes less than a minute. I'll carefully lower one in and let it boil away for 20 seconds. Then carefully flip the thing over and give it another 20 seconds. I don't want these in the boiling water for very long. 40 seconds is all it takes. And as I pull each one out, I'll set them on a piece of parchment paper, making sure they are sitting seam side down. Now my burger bombs are just about ready for the oven, but while they're still a little wet and tacky, I'll give them a sprinkling with some coarse salt, because they're about to become pretzels after all. Finally, they're going into a 425-degree oven for the next 20 to 30 minutes, or until they begin to turn a beautiful brown color. And there we have it. I could have let them bake a little longer to get even darker in color, but these look absolutely perfect to me. Now all that's left to do is cut into one and give it a taste. Piping hot, juicy, cheesy, meaty, pretzel-y. I cannot wait to start devouring this thing. Oh, that pretzel is just perfect. Just a little bit chewy. The flavor's spot on. I gotta take another bite. Absolutely delicious. Admittedly, I've made these before. In fact, last week when I first came up with this idea, I did a couple of different trial runs to figure out just how I thought I wanted to make them. You definitely got to get some fat incorporated into that venison, and you don't have to grind up bacon to do so. You could really use any kind of fatty pork or mix it with some, let's say, 80-20 ground beef. The onions, of course, add some beautiful flavor, and that cheese, I highly recommend mixing it into the ground meat when it's just about finished cooking to really kind of glue everything together in just the right way. I tried a version without the shredded cheese and it was still good. It still worked pretty well, but that loose meat really wanted to be quite loose as I piled it up on my little discs of dough. And if you don't want to fool around with the whole pretzel aspect of this thing, with the boiling water and the baking soda and all that, you can absolutely make these the exact same way, except skipping that step. Make the dough the same way, bake them for the same amount of time. It's going to be delicious. And that Dijonnaise sauce was the perfect accessory for these things because it gives you some of that tang from the mustard and cuts the fattiness a little bit from that bacon, and it really just complements the flavor of everything perfectly. Anyway, if you want to see the full written out recipes for everything I've made here today, I'll put a link to all of it in the video description below. And be sure to like and subscribe and stay up to date with all our latest stuff, including future venison and wild game cooking videos. Lastly, if you like what you see on this channel or on my website, consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/Great Lakes Country. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'm John, and this is Great Lakes Country.